Hello, everyone. My name is Akash Borse from Faber Infinite, and it is my privilege to have our august guest today, Mr. Binoy Meghraj. And when we are talking about this Africa Industrialization Week, we could not think of any better guest than him. So it is our honor and privilege to have him here. Thank you so much for accepting this invite, Mr. Meghraj.
Thank you very much, Akash. It's very kind of you to invite me. It's a privilege to be here taking part in the series.
Right. Pleasure. So when we get onto this particular interview, which would be distributed across all different platforms, and as we celebrate Africa's industrialization, it is my honor and privilege to introduce Mr. Meghraj to all the audience. And considering his rich profile, I am taking this opportunity to read out his profile. Mr. Meghraj, he is a vice chairman and managing director of Meghraj Group, an international investment banking advisory, which is founded in Kenya in 1992, which currently operates out of 5 offices across 5 different countries and with another 13 countries through affiliate business. The business looks after more than 150 US dollar of client assets. It's a third generation family in the business. Mr. Binoy is the chairman and founder of Meghraj Capital, which has offices in Kenya, Japan, and UAE. Currently, Mr. Meghraj is based out of Dubai and primarily operating in these countries. Of course, he has been living in Tokyo in the past and also advising Japanese companies on acquisitions. He's recently been advising on Japan's Ministry of Economy, Trade and Industry. He's also the trustee to 2 family charities, that is MP Shah Charitable Foundation in India and Meghraj Charitable Foundation in Jersey. When it comes to his other interest, Binoy is a member of Dubai, Nairobi, and Zen Pacific Pacific chapters of YPO. When it comes to his academic background, he brings a rich academic background from London Business School with his master's and his honors degree in commerce and accounting from University of Birmingham. So that's in brief nutshell about him. Of course, my words would be, I would be short of words to introduce him and his rich background. So with that, I welcome Mr. Meghraj once again for this particular interview session. Right. So when we are talking about this particular interview, before we jump onto it, I have a very first question where I would want Mr. Meghraj, who brings in with more than 3 decades of experience in finance industry as a vice chairman and managing director of Meghraj Group. We would be very keen and glad to know more about you and your professional journey so far, sir.
Well, thanks, Akash. Thanks for that very kind introduction. Please, no formality. Please call me Binoy. I mean, we don't need to be so formal in this discussion. Just a short background. Our business was founded by my grandfather in Kenya in 1922. So this is our centenary year. He emigrated, as many people did, from Gujarat to Kenya when he was 14 or 15 when he went there. And then when he was 18, he started a business in retailing and wholesaling, which went into manufacturing and various other areas. But he retired from his active business when he was 49. And then spent the rest of his life focused on philanthropy. He built a lot of institutions in healthcare and education, particularly, starting in Kenya and then in India, particularly around Jamnagar, which is where he's from. He moved the family in 1957 to London. So our headquarters since then has been in the UK. But he passed away when he was young. He was 59. And my father and uncle, Vipin and Anand, were still students at the time. So once they'd finished their studies, they'd be left with a little bit of capital, which my grandfather hadn't put into his charities. And using that, they started the second phase of the family's business, which was involved in financial services. So we then set up various businesses headquartered in London, starting with Meghraj Bank, So we had banks in London, in the UK, sorry, and the Isle of Man as well. And then a fiduciary business, which grew through M&A from the 1970s onwards, and various affiliated businesses. I joined the business straight out of university, so in 1990, and I've been working there pretty much since, other than 2 years I took out to go to business school. I started working in Meghraj Bank, and relatively soon after I joined, we started a project to set up a business in India. And this is when India started going through its deregulation, foreign investment started to become allowed. We set up a business which has morphed into what is now Meghraj Capital, our investment banking business. So it's over the last few years, we've been simplifying the business, and now there are two main businesses left. There is the investment banking business, Meghraj Capital. So for that, we have offices in India, Kenya, Japan, the UK, and Dubai. We work on M&A transactions, helping companies to raise debt and equity funding, finding strategic partners, and so on and so forth. And in Kenya, we have an onshore trust business, fiduciary business, where we set up corporate trustee structures and private client structures for clients in East Africa. That business is called MTC. So those are really the two businesses that we focus on. And given the age of my father and uncle, I've taken on the responsibility now for running and managing these businesses. But with a professional management team, I think the key of our businesses is having a professional team there. The work is far too difficult for me to do, but so we've got smart people who actually know what they're doing when running the businesses.
Sure. That, I must say, that's really, really impressive with 100 years of legacy. So
Thank you.
that's really wonderful. So Binoy, when we are talking about this, being into leadership of such a legendary organization that is Meghraj Group, what would be your vision for the future of the organization? If you could shed some light on that, what does growth mean to you?
Okay. I think if I start with the second question in terms of growth, I think growth is something which needs to be multifaceted. And for us, we think simultaneously about growth of the business, but also growth of the social contribution we try and make and the non-profit work that we do. So we want to do both of these things in tandem. We all devote time both to the business and to the social contribution. So I think it's very important for us that growth does not become one or the other. It is a mixture of both of these. Then more. I mean, beyond that, if I think more from the business point of view, for us, we're big believers in focus. We're big believers in going deep. So I know some people would prefer to grow into multiple businesses and across many different areas. But for us, what we want to do is more of what we're doing, but just going deeper and getting better at it, getting more experienced at it, being able to add more value to our clients. So for us, growth is really about the depth of our capabilities and the extent of our experience, so that we can contribute to our clients in a deeper way. So one of the initiatives, and we talked about the time that I lived in Japan and work that we're doing there. One of the big projects that we have is to help Japanese companies become comfortable investing in East Africa. And we can perhaps talk about that a little bit more in more detail later on. It's a really interesting area, but it's something which it's not a trivial exercise to do that. The amount of experience, time, and focus that it requires is it's quite material. And therefore, for us, our growth and our vision for the future is about getting better and better at these things, building up these specialities, so that we get more and more experience at them, and we're able to contribute more and more to our clients and stakeholders.
Right. No, that's wonderful. And as you said, I would say nothing would be easy. And when it comes to getting Japanese organizations to East Africa, I can completely understand and acknowledge the challenges that it comes along with. And also on the other side, when you're talking about growth has to be multifaceted. Of course, when it comes to contributing to society, I would say the Meghraj Group has been leading the way and setting, as in, I would say, setting inspirational milestones for several others, including us. So when when we are talking about such deep roots in Africa, where it comes along with your extensive experience of assisting clients to get into Africa, invest in businesses in Africa. How do you see the journey of Africa's growth in the past few years, as well as in time to come?
Sure. That's really interesting, and I can share my perspective, but also perhaps weave in some of the things which I've heard from other people, the international investors that are looking at Africa. But I think there is some very, very exciting developments that are taking place, which have been taking place for several years. A lot of this is well known, but things like the growth in GDP in many African countries, the growth in GDP per capita, the increasing industrialization, urbanization, the growth of the middle class, both in terms of size, but also in terms of aspiration, changes in credit facilities that are available, which allow more consumption. A lot of what I see echoes what I saw happening in India 15, 20 years ago. And if you look at India's journey over the last 15, 20 years, it has been beyond transformational. I mean, it is extraordinary what has happened there. And I'm very optimistic that we will see the same sorts of changes happening in much of Africa, particularly in East Africa, which is the market that we're most familiar with. So we're very excited to see that. If I take manufacturing, I mean, given the importance of that, and particularly since we're celebrating Industrialization Day, if I think about manufacturing, I mean, that is such an important area to build up and grow on. I mean, it leads to employment, it leads to technology, it leads to investment, it leads to development. Lots of good things happen with manufacturing. But most of the markets, many of the markets in Africa, are too small on their own to have meaningful manufacturing. So you need to have larger markets. And how do we do that? And I think one of the developments over the last couple of years, which is also very much work in progress for the future, which is relevant to this, is the regional economic communities, the East Africa Community, Commerce, these sorts of bodies, which are allowing the markets to come together, allowing us to look at much larger markets than individual country markets. And that will allow manufacturing at a very different scale. It will allow manufacturing to take place, which may not have happened before. Now, one of the good parts of this is the tariff-free access that such free zones would bring in. The other area which I think remains a bottleneck is around logistics. It's one thing being able to manufacture and be able to export to other countries without having to pay tariffs, but one needs to have a good logistics network to be able to do that in a cost-efficient and effective way. And I think that's one area that we still see as being something of a bottleneck. But I'm sure that there are lots of companies that are looking at how to address that and to provide more sophisticated, more effective logistics services to allow this to take place. But these are some of the things that we've seen happening and indeed continuing to happen on the East African side.
Sure. So it's like, sorry. So it's like along with manufacturing, there has to be so many other facets, which has to support the manufacturing. That includes, of course, the logistics. And when you're talking about the pace of growth, what it was maybe perhaps in India 10, 15 years back, and what is it now? I would say, of course, a lot of things are getting replicated in different parts of the world, including Africa. But then the pace at what it is unfolding is phenomenal. It's way, way higher than what it was in the past. So, of course, that definitely adds a lot of value. And when you're talking about the market, I am fascinated by the African continent, the 54 countries, and the kind of diversity that it has. Of course, it has to be supported with so many other infrastructural changes as well. Now, as you're talking about Africa's Industrialization Day, and as we are celebrating this Industrialization Week, it would be our pleasure to know how Meghraj Group's future plans for Africa, since Meghraj Group was also appointed as representative for Kenyan Association of Manufacturers, as well as Kenya Private Sector Alliance in Japan to facilitate investment. So what are your plans around it?
Sure, sure. So we have two businesses operating in Kenya, based in Nairobi, covering East Africa, the investment banking business, Meghraj Capital, and the trustee business, MTC. And they are providing services to companies locally and foreign companies doing business in those markets. And we want to continue, as I said before, in terms of focusing on these businesses, but just getting more and more adept, being able to offer better value-added services to our clients, helping them raise money, helping them structure themselves, find partners, and so on and so forth. But I think one of the initiatives that you alluded to is how can we facilitate investment, particularly strategic investment from Japan to come into East Africa. And it's something where, as you mentioned, Kenya Association of Manufacturers, the Kenya Private Sector Alliance have appointed us as their representatives in Japan. We're working closely with them, but we have some other fantastic collaborators in Japan as well. So the Ministry of Economy, Trade and Industry, there's an organization called Keizai Yukai, which has an app. It's essentially an association of corporate executives in Japan. And they're very engaged on helping Japanese companies to come into Africa. So we work together with these sorts of organizations. What we're absolutely clear about from our experience, particularly our experience in India, is bringing this kind of Japanese investment in will be transformational for companies in East Africa with whom they partner, with whom they decide to work. And I can give examples of that if it's of interest later on. But there is a lot of really good value that can be created. But it's not a simple, straightforward exercise making it happen. Firstly, on the Kenyan side, we need to familiarize companies about Japanese companies as partners because there's been very little experience. So you can't expect people to know and get excited about Japanese investment unless they know more about it. So that's part of the initiative. On the Japanese end, there is a lot to do about making people comfortable with these markets, understanding these markets, making them familiar with the markets, and understanding what really is the risk of these markets. I mean, there's a difference between assessing risk as being, I don't know it, and therefore it's risky, versus actually understanding it and say, well, look, these are the risks. So we need to get to that second stage. Right. But there is a lot of work to do and a lot of cultural bridge building, frankly. What we've seen is Japanese companies clearly have their own ways of making decisions, of thinking about things, of seeing the world. And businesses in East Africa have their own perspective. And creating a linkage and a bridge between them is an interesting and frankly quite complicated challenge. And one of the examples I'd like to give, because it's very simple but actually reasonably profound at the same time, is to do with understanding what people actually mean. If you're talking to a Japanese business person and they say yes to something, what do they mean by that? Well, the reality is they could mean yes, but they could mean no. They could mean maybe, or they could mean I haven't actually decided about that yet. So the answer is actually exactly the same. So there is a lot to do with interpretation of meaning rather than translation of words. And I think that experience we have in interpreting the meaning and actually knowing what's going on and being able to figure out the decision-making structure, but actually what the key issues are, is really important on both sides in terms of being able to create what we call a cultural bridge, an area of trust where people can actually speak to each other and communicate and actually create good partnerships. So I think these are the sorts of things that we're very keen to work on. We have been spending a lot of time on collaborating with CAM, with KEPSA, Keizai Yukai, the Ministry of Economy, Trade and Industry in Japan. The Japanese embassy in Kenya, again, has been very supportive of our efforts. So we're very grateful to all of these collaborators.
Right. That's very interesting, and we are very glad to know that. And I completely agree with you when it comes to understanding the cultural nuances, the differences, and bridging that gap is something which is a very, very interesting journey, I would say. And on a similar line, there has been a lot of jokes around this. So when it comes to if somebody says yes in India, So there could be several such meanings behind it, whether it's a yes nod or a no nod. So there has been so many such jokes around it, but I can very well correlate with it. So with
Yes.
that brings me to the last question of our discussion today, and with our specifically for our audience, we would be very keen to know if you could share some of your experiences when it comes to where a lot of our audiences could learn from it. Specifically, what African industry leaders can leverage from such partnerships for their own growth opportunities.
Sure, sure. So I think wherever you are now, the level of competition is changing. I mean, markets are becoming, excuse me, much more competitive. It's a mixture of increased domestic competition, but also foreign competition coming into many countries, particularly in East Africa. And what are the pathways that one can think of if you're an African business leader to try and address this and deal with it? I mean, one is, I suppose, to become a victim of the change. One is to try and deal with it on your own. But we have seen that there are really interesting ways of dealing with this by partnering and actually going from being a victim of change to actually being on the vanguard of change and actually creating the change in your market and becoming the disruptor of your market.
Right.
And we have seen that there is a lot of potential for businesses in Africa to find large strategic partners, to partners from their same industry that are perhaps much larger than them, but from outside of their country, probably outside of the continent, who can come in and add significant value to them and transform the way in which they're competing. So some of the, depending on the business or the market or the sector, some of the value addition that you could look for from a partner, it could be manufacturing processes, it could be technology, it could be developing your supply chain, it could be product, it could even be something as simple as bringing down your borrowing costs, your funding costs. It could be bringing in new products and clients. But there is a lot that can happen, particularly if you have a much larger international business investing in a relatively smaller domestic business or regional business.
Right.
And we see a lot of interest from foreign strategic investors from many countries in East Africa. They see this as a market for the future. You've got population growth for decades to come. You've got hopefully GDP per capita growth for decades to come. There's a lot to be optimistic about, but many other more developed markets are really quite moribund in terms of their growth prospects. So there is that interest. And I think that there, one can find a really good space to create partnerships between leading companies in African countries and good foreign partners that can come together and really have a very positive win-win relationship.
Sure, of course. That was really wonderful, and I'm very confident from your experiences. I'm sure a lot of our audiences would be able to implement a lot of those things. So on that note, let's take a pause for now. I understand that you are a busy man. Thank you so much for sparing this time for us and our audience. Today, as we celebrate Africa's Industrialization Week, thank you once again. And I would also want to thank all our audiences, the partners and patrons specifically who have joined hands for this particular initiative as we at Faber Infinite celebrate Africa's Industrialization Week. Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Akash. It's been a pleasure to be here. Thanks for the invitation.
Pleasure. Thank you so much.